Today we have Ravi Philemon as a guest on Breaking the Spell. Thanks, Ravi, for coming to join us. Ravi started Red Dot United, Singapore's newest and youngest political party, last year, 2 weeks before the general elections. And but before we get into all that, I would like to ask our opening question to all guests. Can you remember the first time that you felt that things shouldn't be the way they are?
Well, thanks for inviting me to the show, Ansu and Douglas. I think, and just to clarify, we are not the newest party on the block. There is one that started after the general election. Well, I can't remember the name of the political party now, but but I know the players in that political party, right? So. But then it's a journey, right? So the first question to me is like very, very important because it's my political awakening as well, right? Because I come from a disadvantaged family. My mom's my hero. She held down 3 jobs to send her children to school, and me being the oldest, I left school after I finished my O-levels. Not because I didn't do well in my O-level, I qualified for JC and all that, but because being the oldest, I felt that I needed to support my mother, lessen her burden a little bit. So at the age of 16, I went to work as a store hand, but life back then was different, right? So we had this sense that if you worked hard enough, you can succeed in life. So from being homeless, we bought a 1-room flat in Bukit Ho Swee, and from there we sold that flat and we moved to an executive mansionette. And then in 1996 we sold it for almost $700,000, which is a lot of money for us.
That's for sure.
So it all reinforced the belief that if you worked hard enough, you can succeed in life. And I believe in the ethos of working hard. I still do, right? I'm a self-starter. A lot of people say I don't need a lot to get me going, right? And so I think the first awakening came sometime in 1999 or the year 2000, I think, where I have always been helping people. I was in the social services sector, but also volunteering the different organizations and all that. So I knew this particular family, right? The husband was a lorry driver. His wife, his second marriage, his wife was unemployed, and they had 3 young children. But the husband had this problem with alcohol, right? So he always comes back drunk. The children don't have enough to eat. Problems between the husband and the wife and the children. Very typical problems in a lower income family. So we are very involved in helping this family, which was living in Henderson Road, volunteering and helping this family. And it came a point in time when this person, the husband, he passed away because he had liver failure from excessive alcohol use and all that. He passed away. And so we continued helping this family and got the woman a job, tried to place the children in childcare centers and kindergartens and all that, and one fine day I got this call from the woman saying that the HDB officer is there and they want to evict them, right? I said, why? Oh, she says the HDB officer said that we have not paid the rental for the flat, for a few months, and they want us to pay it right now. If not, they want us to leave. So I said, cannot be, so why don't you just talk to the officer and explain your situation to them, show them your husband's death certificate. He passed on a few months ago, I think a couple of months ago. And show them that you just started going to work and that you'll be able to pay off, and she said okay. She called me back a few minutes later saying that the officer will not listen to her. The officer wants her to leave the flat now. She didn't know what to do. So I thought that it's impossible. How can an HDB officer tell a woman with 3 young children, a widow, to leave the house, a public rental flat, and where would they go, right? So I thought that this woman, she didn't know how to explain her predicament to the HDB officer. So I told her that I'll drive over and I'll talk to the HDB officer about it. So I did, and to my surprise, the officer knew exactly what the woman was saying, right? And so she was actually asking her to get out of the house with the 3 children, It was like for barely like $100 right? And I was like, so my question to the officer was, where do you want her to go? And she was like, I don't care, and so that was my moment of awakening. So it's like I took some money from my wallet and I paid whatever the outstanding was, so just so that woman and child could continue staying there. But at the back of my mind, it was like, wait, this is one woman and her family that I could help. How many more are there out there? So that was always at the back of my mind. And but growing up in Singapore, you always feel that you work within the system. You don't challenge authority. Even when you challenge them, you challenge them in a quiet manner. So but if you ask me for one specific moment, that was it.
Thank you for sharing that story. So maybe let's get a little bit into your motivations for going into politics and starting Red Dot United. And for full transparency to our viewers, I just want to say that I'm actually a paying member of Red Dot United, and that we've had some conversations where I've introduced you to some ideas such as Doughnut economics, which you've appreciated. But Breaking the Spell is a non-partisan show. We actually invite and welcome people from all parties and political persuasions, as long as they share common interests in questioning certain dogmas in society. So currently you are the Secretary General of Red Dot United, right?
Yes.
Can you tell us your reasons for starting this?
Well, it's a long story actually. I have been involved in the socio-political scene of Singapore since I came back from the US in 2008, or in the middle of 2008, or towards the end of 2008. And I started off by helping in the Meet the People session of a PAP minister, and then after a while I felt that I didn't align ideologically with, they were doing great, fantastic work in Meet the People session, right? Because I loved helping people, and I could see that they were doing good stuff. So it's nothing to do with the MPS per se, but just because I felt that my views do not align with the views of the PAP. Mainly because I felt that it was a huge machinery, right? Of course, people do think that they can change the machinery by being in it, and I do know some social activists who join the PAP wanting to change the machinery from within, and hats off to them. But I think it will be an arduous task, right? Because power, it's all about power, right? And things have worked for them for decades, for 50 years, going on to 60 years now. Why would they change a working model, right? So that led me. I've always been involved in social politics and so on. So then the 2011 elections came along, and I wanted to. Some political parties and their leaders asked me if I would contest the 2011 election under their banner, and I said no to them because I didn't know how the political system actually worked, right? And I said, so Jeanette was my friend. She was running for in Mountbatten, and Jeanette Chong Aruldos. So I asked her if I could help her in her campaign. So that's actually how my journey started, right? And I mean, I think for me it's because I am very values-driven, values-oriented, and so and there's a bit of a difference, right? Coming from the civil society, I see myself as coming from the civil society. Right? So for the civil society, at the end of the day, the cause is the most important thing. Internally, we can have a lot of arguments, disagreements, debates, but we are all single-minded and focused that the cause is the most important thing. We are all willing to egos, set aside our egos, our differences, to make sure that the cause, it succeeds. Right? So when it comes to a political party, I realized that it's a little bit different, because a lot of people within a political party, they want to get elected, right? So the cause is not as important as the personality. They all try to build their personality, right? So so that led me to after I helped Jeanette, so I joined the political party to continue helping her, and then I knew the Chams for a very long time, so when Jeanette left the political party that she was in, I persuaded her to go join the Chams, and so that's the role that I saw for myself, as someone who would support this woman, who to me is she's someone I looked up to, right? I mean, to me, she's a superwoman as well, right? She's got a successful career. She manages her family well. She believes in causes. And she's willing to stick out her neck. So I'm always drawn to strong women. Because my mom's my example, right? So and then the 2015 election came along, and Mr. Cham asked me if I would contest, and my first reaction was, no, I'm not ready, and then he asked me a very pointed question. So what's the excuse now? That made me think, right? So because in 2011, I felt that I had better excuses, in the sense that my children were still very young. I was at a different station in my life, but in 2015, my children were older, and I could perhaps contest that election as sort of like a national service, as a one-off thing, right? So that's how I contested 2015 election. It was rather by accident. Mr. and Mrs. Cham are my good friends, and we still keep in touch, right? So, and then but contesting the 2015 election was an eye-opener for me. I realized how you cannot only be engaged with the voters in between election. You have to be engaged throughout, and when PSP started, I felt that this was a party that I could lend my weight to. And so me and my friends, we joined PSP. Because I guess the biggest setback, the biggest reason why we had to start RDU was because, like I said, a lot of political parties are very personality driven, right? Well, I think the Workers' Party is making a change from that now, right? I see that change happening. I've seen that change happening since the last GE, right? But I felt that there is a need for a values-driven party. Personality will always be there. We'll always have personality, right? But the way we craft our policies, the way we project ourselves, the way we put ourselves out there in the marketplace, in the homes of the people, the way we project ourselves has all got to be values-driven, right? So we felt that there was a space for a values-driven political party as well, and so that was how RD was launched.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, I really love your idea of contesting elections as a form of national service. Maybe more and more people should do that. Douglas, I know you're raring to go with some questions.
Oh yeah. No, I actually think that that's a really interesting introduction to your history, and it's even fascinating to hear that you even helped out at a Meet the People session as well. So I have a couple of questions just from springing from that, right? Like, would you say there have been any changes in terms of what people used to ask for in terms of social assistance compared to back then and now? So there's at least a good, maybe say 10 years, right, or more. So that's one question I have. Then the other question I have, which is, and this is kind of like for me to tease you a little bit, like I said, because I understand what you mean by like how in politics, perhaps personality-driven politics cannot be helped. Some people won't actually gravitate to certain personalities. Right. But I guess when you say that your party is different because you want to focus on values, I'm thinking that if I'm a member of another party, I may feel insulted by that. I may feel like, are you saying that we don't have any values? But obviously, I know you don't mean that. And my sense of your argument is more like perhaps the opposition parties themselves, right? And there are a couple of them. They don't differentiate themselves enough from each other, because that's actually one of my feelings as well. Like if I look at say Workers' Party or Reform Party or PSP, like there isn't a very strong differentiation about what do you really stand for in terms of your ideas and your policies. Right. So is that the sense? Is my question getting?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for bringing that up. So that's I do not mean that the other political parties don't have values at all. That's not. That will be the total opposite of what I am saying. But what I'm saying is that, like I said, people have asked me. This is a question that every journalist will ask me, every media person will ask me, because I have left a few political parties before I started RDU, right? And I think Gillian Koh from IPS, she had the most, when we started RDU, she had the most, to me, it felt like the most sensible thing that someone would say, and she said that this is a person who has been around and know that something is missing, and he's trying to fill that gap, something to that effect. Of course, I am like paraphrasing her, right? So I think that would be the most sensible comment on that, right? Because really there is a gap, right? When you look at, there is a real a gap, because when you look at just before the last election, one political party dissolved, and the more established, some established political parties only fielded 5 candidates. Another political party which has been around for about 5-6 years, they fielded just one candidate. We were formed just 2 weeks before the last election. And we were able to contest the election, the 2020 election, because there was a space. There was a real space there, And that space, I feel, has gotten bigger since the last election, right? So that's what I mean, right? And I mean, this is what I tell the media persons, right, who ask me if, I've made the rounds in different political party and all that. I still remain within the Android system, right? I haven't gone from the Android to the iOS system, right? So, but that's what it is, because the PAP, like I said before, it's a mammoth, right? How can you, because that's the only thing all the opposition parties look at, right? How do I attack this mammoth? And so it's a very limited space in that sense, but I feel that we can go beyond that, right? And that is why we, when Ansu introduced the Doughnut economics, it's like, what have we got to lose? I think this is the right direction to go in, because if you speak about values and about championing values, then I think the Doughnut economics is all about values, right? I really love it because it was really appealing to me because our symbol is the compass, right? And I think the Doughnut economics is a compass for prosperity for human beings in the 21st century. So that's one example. That's one example where I felt that, values can drive an organization. And I've been involved in the NGO sector for a very long time, right? And I think the mission and the vision of an organization is very, very important. We cannot be pragmatic. See, a lot of political organizations are a little bit different, right? Because very often, because there's a need to be elected, there's a need to present, and to be elected, you need to present yourself in a certain manner to the electorate, and all that. And sometimes values they get pushed back a little bit for the sake of pragmatism. I'm not saying that pragmatism is wrong, but even pragmatism, it needs to be anchored in values, right? So that's where I find the gap, right, for an organization which is values-based to be put out there in the marketplace. And ultimately, it's the people who will decide.
If I may bounce off that, I think a good contrast to me, because even on our show, right, we've talked a few times about the economy and the system, how the economic system functions in Singapore. So we have this word about how it's very mechanistic, it's very non-humanist. So I think that actually what's happening politically in Singapore is that, yes, you are right, the PAP is a giant mammoth that has this, has dominated in terms of our political thinking, that we should only just strive for very pragmatic, instrumental, mechanistic values. Right. But where the opposition parties are trying to jump in is to offer an alternative, which is something much more humanistic. But I guess that is the struggle. So because do Singaporeans themselves want to see that kind of world? Do they want to see a different kind of Singapore where it's not always about GDP, it's not always about high income growth, and it's about something else, right? And I guess what I feel is that perhaps the opposition parties need to make that vision a lot more clearer and palatable.
Of course,
right? Yeah.
Of course, totally agree. So for me, it's always like, how do you break it down? It's a big idea. People may not even understand what a Doughnut economics is, right? It's a very big idea. But if you break it down, it's actually about the foundation being the social, and the ceiling being the ecology, and the center being, the best place for happiness and for prosperity for everyone. So it's a very simple idea in that sense, right? But how do you communicate that idea? I think it's very important. I think it's the more I read about it, the more videos I see on it. I really like that idea because it's like it borrows from different schools of thoughts, right? Like from complexity, from feminism, from environmental, from institutional and behavioral economics. So many different schools of thoughts, and it's like a multidisciplinary approach at looking at how society can progress and prosper together without burdening the planet beyond its capability or ability, right? So it's a very interesting concept.
Yeah, for most of my life, I would say I've been a pretty politically apathetic person or apolitical. And even at the last general elections, I wasn't all that interested, but I did vote. And one of the things that I was drawn to Red Dot United about when I first heard about it, and I heard about it because a friend of mine, Alec Talk, was one of the candidates. But it was actually the personality of the party. So it's interesting that even though you talk about you want to be values driven rather than personality, but I feel that Red Dot United does have a fresh personality compared to some of the other parties. And one of the things that I would say is that I had the impression that you guys don't take yourself too seriously. Like that. It seemed like you were trying to have fun as well. And I feel that even fits into how readily you embrace this idea of a donut, which, how could anyone take something like a donut seriously, and yet you're going for it?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people think that if you're small, you cannot make a lot of changes and all that. I have a different opinion. I think being small, firstly, I believe that you do not despise small beginnings, right? So you never know when something starts small, how it's going to grow, the kind of impact that it's going to have and all that. I always see it as a ripple, right? You throw a tiny pebble into the lake and the kind of ripple that it makes, and where you throw that pebble is also important, So, and I also see that sometimes, the change, I don't know if I can go into the spiritual part.
No, go for it. Go for it.
Please do.
Yeah, no, this is it's meant to be a very candid conversation. So yeah, please go for it.
I'm a very spiritual person, so and sometimes I feel that I can foresee a future, kind of a future, but I know that the future that I foresee is not going to happen all at once, all at the same time, right? I know that there are some small doors that needs to be opened, and one thing will lead to another for that change to happen, right? So I think I have the ability to spot people who are actually doors for making changes happen, right? And I mean, all through my life I have done that. One really visible example is Liana. I found her I saw her first at the Sembawang beach, and she was homeless, and in the 2020 election, she was my co-candidate. Who would have thought that someone who was homeless in 2010 would contest the election 10 years later? Who would have thought of that, right? So I think, if you look at another example, right? I think Copahagen in Denmark, a very small party. It started, I think it's it's an alternative party. I think it's the smallest party in that country. They were the one who initiated Doughnut economics in that city, that Copahagen city, right? and they got buy-in from all the bigger parties, to work towards this. And today, today Copenhagen is one of the least stressful countries in the world, among the least stressful countries in the world, and it all happened because of one small little party. They felt that, let's bring everybody in together. Let's work on this. This is very important. It's beyond party interest. It is of national interest. Bring everyone together. Let's work on this together. Now, I feel that that's something that RDU can offer, because we don't threaten anybody, and I don't believe in in confrontational politics, right? Of course, that I don't believe in confrontational politics does not mean that I won't challenge ideas, or that I won't challenge views put forth in a vigorous manner, right? But always tackle the ball and don't tackle the person. That's
yeah, actually, the thing you said about small beginnings, isn't that supposed to be, an example of Singapore itself, right? As a small country, overcoming adversity and challenges. And I think what you said about Liana is true, which is, who would have fathomed that in this current day and age, we can entertain a politician that used to be homeless 10 years ago. So my question to you is that, do you really think, like, in terms of Singaporean sentiment, they have really shifted from, the idea that a politician needs to have certain credentials, this person must have gone through the whole civil service, must have gone through military, must have made it to the Ivy League schools, and do you think Singaporeans can actually accept someone that is contrarian to the entire, kind of setup, that kind of character?
I think society is changing for sure. I'll tell you two stories. I think I've told this story to Ansu before, right? And I think it's the young people who are driving this change in society, right? And I think the young people, they see beyond the color of the skin. They see beyond the qualifications of the person, and they look at the capability of the person, right? So because and if this person can represent my views, in the wider society, right? So that's what the younger people are looking at. And of course there are people who feel, I've been for house visits, right? And I've had responses where people will say that, if I would vote for you if only you were Chinese, so not because they are racist, but it's because they want somebody who is more fluent in the language that they are comfortable in, right? So, and I do understand that perspective as well, because you want a representative who would be best able to represent you, right? And when you have a problem, you would want to come and talk to me and have the ease of communicating with me, right? So I do totally understand that, right? So society, I think it's at a very interesting time. We're at a crossroads, right? Very interesting time at crossroads. But I'm also excited about the young people, because eventually they will influence the older voters. And I like the direction that society is going in right now. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yeah, I think, perhaps the results of GE 2020 kind of shows that kind of dynamic a little bit. If one can extrapolate from the wins in, what was it again? Aljunied, right?
Right.
Yeah, and Sengkang.
Sengkang.
Yeah. So, and I think it's a hard, no one can predict the future, obviously. Sometimes there is concerns that when someone, in their 20s is quite idealistic, might they change their ideals later on when they grow older in life? But I think right now, as it stands, because of all these anxieties about like climate change, about how the work life, really the work lifestyle in Singapore is suffocating,
Right.
It's unsustainable,
Right.
and I, in a previous video with Ong Su and
Right.
other co-hosts, I brought up the idea that perhaps it's not giving us even proportional benefits, because a lot of the wealth that's generated is going to the super wealthy and elite.
Right.
So it's very sensible for people to question the system itself if it's functioning that way. Yeah. So anyway, the other thing I wanted to point out, because since we talk a lot about donut economics, I think it's important to say that other countries are actually taking the charge in implementing the principles of donut economics, and it's entirely possible for Singapore to implement such a system. So it's just for our viewers to know that there are other viewpoints out there, other ways that you can change the economy
Right.
to be something much more sustainable and something that you actually desire to live in. Yeah.
Also, I really appreciate that you brought up the Alternative Party, because I had first read about them in a book called The Listening Society,
Okay.
which is about this new political philosophy called meta-modernism.
Right.
And they struck me as this really interesting party
Right.
that they would say to their political opponents, we may not agree with your views,
Right.
but we will definitely listen and
Right.
try to really understand your
Right.
position. And they, as you
Yeah.
say, they really come about
Yeah.
it from a non-confrontational
Yeah.
viewpoint. And when I first heard about Red Dot United and read about you guys on your website,
Right.
I saw some similarities.
Right.
And I actually, in my mind, I thought, oh, this is Red Dot United is Singapore's equivalent
Right.
of the Alternative. So
Right.
it's really interesting that now you kind of brought it up.
High praise, high praise. Yeah.
Thank you.
But I want to ask, even for Ang Su, right? So you are able to have that kind of foresight, or even can see the potentials of a small party like RDU, right? But to a lot of Singaporeans, what are the common criticisms? They will say things like, you're not qualified, you didn't go up the ranks, no experience, So I'm curious how, even for yourself, right? How do you address such criticisms, right? And then of course, obviously for
Let's putting Ansu in a spot.
Well, I have an opinion on that. For myself, I don't know if I can speak for other Singaporeans, but I've come to the realization that expertise and competence are way overrated in today's world, because there's so many people out there who are very competent and experts in their fields. Take Alan Greenspan, for instance,
Yep.
the chairman of
Right.
the
Yeah.
U.S. Federal Bank, Federal Reserve, and super smart guy, to the point where senators were intimidated. They didn't dare to question him, right? Because he's so smart. And yet, he had used all the intellect in the wrong direction.
Right.
So, if you have great intellect, but you point it in the wrong direction, it can do even more damage. And so, at this point, I would rather have leaders that have a moral compass that I feel like I can trust. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's so true, right? Kishore Mahbubani, our Singapore, a very smart person, who has said a lot of smart things. But I think in 2009 or 2010, he said something like, I'm not sure of the year, but at least 10 years ago, he said something like, homelessness has been eradicated in Singapore, something to that effect, right? Because, I totally respect this person, but how do you eradicate homelessness? Unless you live in utopia. So,
If I may add to that, right, philosophically, there is this cognitive bias. So I can't remember the exact name for it, but essentially the idea is that it's a kind of fallacy to think that just because someone, say, for example, a doctor, it means this person knows politics, he knows law, he knows economics. It doesn't mean that at all. Someone can be very smart in one particular area, but it doesn't mean that their expertise translates very well to other areas. And I think this I also think goes back to what you just said about a person in very high position not relating to reality on the ground. And I think that's what some people feel that's problematic about the current ruling elite, ruling party, which is there is that disconnect from the ground. So even if you do have the smarts and the qualifications and everything, but somehow this disconnect, is...
No, thanks for bringing that up, because you asked me a question earlier about what I find different in the other political parties, right? So everybody is trying to be like the PAP, right? So that to me is a little bit disconcerting, because you try to bring in the best Harvard-trained, Cambridge-trained persons, captains of industry, professionals in the different fields and all that. Nothing against any of that. You know, they're all well qualified in their field, and I respect them for all of that, right? But how is it different from the mold of people that the PAP is bringing in? You know, so I think. So will we have something if we bring in people who are from the same mold, you know, and if I get to be the government and the people who are with me is in the same mold as the people who are right now in the PAP, will we have a different kind of government? So that's a very interesting thought exercise, you know, to have, right? So I think that, to me, I think that it's important. My personal opinion, I feel that yes, running the country is important. Policies are important for that. We have a very good civil service, right? Civil servants who are good bureaucrats, technocrats, who know how to craft policies. I think what's more important is for political parties to offer. Political parties should offer good men and good women with the right motivations to represent the people, because then you can guide policies. This will work, this won't work. These are the trade-offs. And how do I lessen the effects of this trade-off? No, a good man or a good woman will be able to feel that. I'm not saying that people who are who are right now elected are not good people. Many of the people that I know in the PAP, they're very good people. They're my friends, you know. But it's because, like I said, it's a huge machinery, you know, and sometimes there are no windows. When you're sitting right on the castle, right? There are no windows, like, you know. So
I actually want to just hammer on that point as well, because I think for a lot of people out there, they may have this conception that if I vote in the wrong people, in inverted commas, right, then the country will fall, you know, there will be chaos, you know, and we will, you know, sink into ruins, right? But as you mentioned, a lot of what is done in Singapore is actually buttressed by the civil service. And actually, you know, having myself work in civil service, it is the civil servants themselves who come up with the policies, who come up with the proposals. So it's not actually like when you vote in a certain minister, he comes in and he can change the whole system overnight. If anything, sometimes it's actually the civil servants themselves who are pushing the ministers to change their ideas and to actually improve on policies. You know, because year after year, right, I mean, the government is also forced to be a bit more progressive, whether it's about giving more welfare benefits, whether it's about recognizing that certain groups, social groups should be recipients for social assistance. So the barrier or the benchmark keeps getting changed, not because the minister that came in decided to have a fresh change of mind, but sometimes it's the people on the ground who's been pushing for it. So that's, you know, sort of my way to assuage people's fears that, oh, you know, voting the wrong people, whole country goes to hell in a basket. So
I mean, I think that it's also important for the civil service to be independent, right? Because I think the civil service should ask questions like why. Why is a very important question to ask. Right? I think I think there's a distinct difference from the civil service in the past to the civil service in the present, in my opinion. Right? I think the civil service in the past, where the minister would ask to do something, they will always ask the question why, right? Or if the minister were to say jump, you know, the civil service will ask why jump, right? Whereas the civil service now, I think their question is how high, right? So, so there is a difference, right? So I think there must be a balance. There must be a balance, and I think civil service, we have a very good civil service, but we also need good men and women to guide the civil service, and that's the role I believe that political parties can play.
So I do want to pose like a hypothetical scenario to you. Suppose in our wildest dreams, Red Dot United actually took over the government. You are now the government. And you know, you've talked about it's all about putting good people in those positions. But a lot of studies have actually shown that, when people are put in positions of power, they actually become less empathetic. It's not about the person, it's the position they're in. There's an interesting study where they gave subjects a Toyota or a BMW.
Right.
And the people who drove Toyotas, for the morning, they were very courteous to pedestrians. And the people who drove BMWs, they were would ignore pedestrians, right? And the only difference was the car that they were given, right? So my question to you is, let's say Red Dot United were to take over the government, how do you think you can actually prevent that from happening within your own party? How do you keep that culture of empathy?
I think, when you look at the party constitution, we really thought about this even when we were writing our constitution. The RDU is the one of the very few political parties which do not have a cadre system. Meaning, the cadre system is there to make sure that certain people within the party gets elected into the Central Executive Council over and over again, and you only co-opt people to become cadres who you feel comfortable and confident that they will keep your interests going, right? So that's the first layer that we removed. So we don't have a cadre system. So technically, any member can put himself up to be voted into the Central Executive Council, right? So it was on purpose that we did away with the cadre system, because we don't want to entrench the leadership for a year. We want fresh ideas, new people to come in into the party, right? So beyond that, we have talked about how if we ever come to party, if let's say if I become the Prime Minister, right, become a Prime Minister for no more than 2 terms, right, after which I would have to step down and someone else will take up the premiership, right? So these are some of the ideas that we have talked about internally, but which may not happen in the near or the midterm future, but you never know, with politics, you never know, right? So, yeah.
I have a data point to share. So, because we are talking about, empathy and stuff like that. So, this comes from the recent IPS study. So, I'll share the data first, then after I would like your comments, both of you actually. So, in the IPS study, right, it was found that close to 4 in 10 never discuss politics with friends. More than half engage in conversations only occasionally. Political activism is unpopular, although the young individuals and those of higher socio-economic status are more likely to participate in such actions. And also, there was another data point about how we have the highest, as a country, highest proportion of respondents who would never join a boycott, which is 79%, a peaceful demonstration, 74%, or an unofficial strike, 88%. So, talking about empathy and stuff like that. So, I'm just curious about what you guys make of this, and, do you think this is something concerning? Would you like to see this kind of mindsets shift, nationally speaking?
Well, I think this goes back to one of our introductory videos about why it's politics, because I think our view and our motivation for doing this show is that if you don't engage in this talking about politics, or you don't engage in activism, you are still involved. It's by doing nothing, you are basically placing a vote for corporations that are destroying the environment. You are voting for inequality. So whether you like it or not, you are involved.
Yeah. I'll tell you. I think basically I'm a storyteller. I love telling stories, right? My children. I make up stories even for my children, when they were much younger. They're older now. My daughters will be 28 this year, my son's 26, my daughter's married, she's got a child of her own, so I'm a very young grandfather, right?
Congrats.
Thank you. But my children still remember when they were much younger, I will tell them bedtime stories. And these are all invented stories. One of the stories that I told them was the story of 7 mountains and 7 seas, how the life of this king was hidden beyond the 7 mountains and the 7 seas, and how this person and this king is an evil king, and the person has to go past the 7 mountains and the 7 seas to get his life, which is hidden somewhere there, right? And every day I would like think up of like how arduous that journey is, you know. So my children can sort of like still remember that. I mean, I've kept that story going for like 6 months, right? So I think I'm a storyteller, right? So I'll tell you my real story. When I came back from the US, right? I already said that I was with the Online Citizen, and the Online Citizen was organizing a protest against the transport hike. And this was going to be held in the Speaker's Corner. This was in 2008. So I was like preparing, getting ready to go, you know, got my wife to go. My children were still young at that time, getting all of them ready to go. And I asked my mom, you know, if she would join us. My mom said, no, I'm not going to join. Firstly, she discouraged me from going, you know. Then when I asked her, she said that no. I said, why? Because when the police arrest you and put you in jail, you need somebody outside to bail you out. So that was her fear. My mom is in the 70s, right? So she felt that anything you do against any kind of protest that you hold, you know, you're going to face some repercussions. You could go to jail or whatever. So this is a very real fear among a lot of Singaporeans, right? And my mom is a person who has always voted for the PAP. She only changed her views very recently, I think in 2015, right about at that time, right?
Can you explain why?
Well, she came back from market and she said that the fish price is so expensive. So I started the simple conversation like that. I said, why is the fish price so expensive? You know, then she was like trying to say, I'm not sure why it's expensive. It could be because of the transport. Now the people are paying so much more for the transport to bring the fish from Malaysia to Singapore. So I just kept on asking why question. And then she finally came to the realization. She said, the PAP must go. So that was the final. So it started the fish conversation actually, you know.
But that's the interesting thing, right? Because your mom's story actually illustrates the very dominant factor about cost of living, right, as a factor for voting decisions, right? And you know, my sense is that can we do better than this? You know, as a country, can we not just I'll vote the opposition because life is getting more costly. I mean, can there not be other factors, other considerations, right, that will matter to a person when it comes to voting a party in? Yeah. So you know, I think do you see like this as a possibility? Do you think that it's also maybe an imperative for all the opposition parties and civil society to, grow that kind of mindset?
Yeah, I think for me, I think that it's very important for the civil society. Well, the civil society not so much, because the civil society it's actually picking up causes, a lot of the causes which a political party will not usually pick up.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, one example is the Project X, which reaches out to the sex workers in Singapore, and it's best done by a civil society organization than by a political party, because it'd be almost impossible for a political party to champion the needs and the rights of sex workers, right? So that we will always need civil society organizations, and we need to work in partnership with civil society organizations, right? So, but I think that for political parties, because you are more concerned about mainstream issues, and some niche issues over time they become mainstream as well, right? I mean, who would have thought, even 10 years ago, that that there will be a groundswell of support for the LGBT issues, right? But yet today, that's a reality, right? And so we are sort of like, I think it's very important to, to me, I think that it's very important to know what the people are feeling. What are the struggles of the people? You know, what are their joys? I want to take part in their joy. You know, what are their fears? I want to try and assuage some of their fears. You know, I want to be involved in the people's lives. You know, to be able to be a part of their lives. You know, to me, that's very exciting, right? And I think that that's what good political parties they need to do, to be involved in the people's life and try to make life and to share life with them, basically to share life with them. I wouldn't even say help the people, right? Because help means I'm putting myself at a higher place, because the helper is always higher than the helpee, right? So I would say I want to share in the life of the people, you know, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, since you brought up the whole issue of LGBTQ rights, you know, why do you think it's been so hard to abolish a law like Section 377A? You know, like it just seems to me quite obvious that it shouldn't stay on the books.
I know, right? So that's one of the things that we raised in the last election as well. We said that the government should decide if 377A should go or it should stay. You know, there shouldn't be an ambiguous position like what it is right now, right? It'll be there, but we won't enforce it. It's
yeah, so actually this goes into one of the questions we have, which is, you know, you talk about how parties should try to, you know, maybe strive for mainstream issues because there's a lot more accessible, maybe relatable to voters, right? And one of the questions we have is that does that mean that like all these more, you know, non-mainstream issues like LGBTQ rights, maybe environmental rights, capital punishment, like do you think that it would never be possible for parties to actually touch on these issues?
Yeah, I don't know why LGBT rights is not mainstream. You know, I'm against unfair discrimination of any kind, right? And I would like RDU to champion values like that. You know, to me, which is why fairness is one of the values which is right at the beginning of the values that we believe in, right? And I think it's just even people who are from the LGBT community, they're part of us. How can we unfairly discriminate them? To me, it's plain wrong, right?
I want to add to the viewers that you are actually a Christian, if I'm not wrong. So this is a Christian, very fervent Christian believer who's actually championing for LGBT rights, which is supposed to be unheard of.
Well, yeah, I mean, I am a committed follower of Christ. I try not to wear labels. Yes, I mean, if I have to wear the label of a Christian, so be it. You know, yeah, I am ordained in the year 1995 under a Pentecostal order. Yeah.
So touching on that idea about fairness and discrimination, right? You said just now, you shared like how when you went around to you know, to your constituents, and how one of them at least made a comment about, oh, if you were Chinese, then you know I would vote for you. So I mean, that's a bit sad to hear, because it seems to reinforce this perception that at least does come a little bit from the PAP, or I should say a lot from the PAP, that Singapore is not ready for a ethnic minority, you know, prime minister. I mean, is that how would you respond to that?
Well, I think that there are, you see, you elect a government in place to push some things through, right? Things don't happen, a lot of things don't happen just like that. But being the government in power, you have certain authority and power to push some things through. I do not doubt that. Well, let me tell you more stories. You know, in the 2015 election, right, I was, well, first before I tell this story, the person who asked me that question about, I would vote for you if you are Chinese, there was no malice in what he said, right? He meant it as it is, because he preferred a Chinese speaker. I'm not a Chinese speaker. I do understand a little bit of I can pick up some words and try and make out what you're trying to say, but I'm not a Chinese speaker. I can't speak Chinese fluently back to you. So I totally understand where he's coming from. So another story is during the 2015 election, at the end of the campaigning period, I sat down at a coffee shop to a bowl of hor fun with my friends, and I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around and there was this older Chinese gentleman, and he was like, "Wow, Ravi, you can eat hor fun one ah." I was like, "So yeah, why?" And it's like, "Wow, I thought you only eat curry, you know." So, so I'm here, I'm a fourth generation Singaporean, and older Chinese man thinks that I only eat curry and rice, you know. So, I mean, that's the kind of society we live in, right? But that doesn't mean that, you know, if I have the power, that's the kind of things that you're trying to change, right? To have a more race-neutral society. So being the government in power, these are the kind of issues that you can take a lead in, right? Gender issues, race issues, you know, these are issues that you can take a lead in, you know, and allow society to change at a faster pace. Because you know that these are the right things to do, right?
Yeah, no, it's always interesting to me when the government says it will sort of follow what the majority wants, right?
Right.
There's no like moral leadership
Right.
there, right? Whereas in the past, like I would say, when Lee Kuan Yew felt, okay, we need to stop Chinese people from spitting on the floor, right?
Right.
Even though that's their culture,
Right.
right? He would just say,
Right.
no, this is what we're going to do,
Right.
right? So it feels like the government of today seems a lot meeker than
Right.
it has been in the
Right.
past.
I'm going to be quite, I'm going to be quite controversial here and say, actually, I don't even agree with the argument that this is the way they do things. No, they don't, because you know when there was widespread public disagreement with having the casinos, they still ramp it in,
Right.
When they decided to have a Malay exclusive presidential run,
Right.
even though I think it was very unpopular, they still
Right.
ramp it in. So I don't actually agree with the idea, or with their argument that we only are following with what the public thinks. And in fact, I think that's them pandering to only, in their minds, a conservative majority. But I even doubt the validity of that. Yeah. So, but in any case, going back to your point about how these are individuals you've met, and like you just said, you don't describe them as racist, right? And I guess that's where we are right now in Singapore when it comes to race discourse, right? We have seen in this case a few episodes of very explicit, outright racist behavior, but to me that's not really interesting because these people will always exist in some form or another. But what's more important is structural racism.
Yes.
So in this case, when you have a person who actually says to you, well, I can't vote for you because you don't speak fluent Chinese. In some sense, that's the structure of the system that we live in, right? That, well, you've got to be pretty good with certain languages.
Right.
And obviously, you're only going to be fluent in certain languages
Right.
because you're going to take those languages as your mother tongue.
Right.
So, that's where I think a reform of the system can really help
Yes.
to ameliorate
Right.
this kind of, structural racism.
Agree.
Yeah.
Agree.
Just to switch tangents a little bit, find out more about you personally. Is there a political leader out there, it could be local or it could be international, that that inspires you?
I mean, I would say my first hero is Jesus, of course, because his life, right? He was persecuted because he held a certain political belief, right? That all men are equal, right? And that aside, I also admire MGR. I don't know whether you know who he is. He's an Indian actor from the 50s, 60s, and 70s who eventually became the chief minister of Tamil Nadu in India. When he was in his deathbed, I'll tell you his story, right? When he was in his deathbed, he had liver failure, I think, and he was in the US getting treatment. And the election was called at the time when he was getting treatment in the US for his for his kidney failure, right? And the people still voted for him to come back to power. And the people said that he's still alive, right? He's still breathing, right? Okay, I'll vote for him, right? And it's because he knew the heartbeat of the people. He brought in programs and policies that benefited the common man. That even when he is sick and in hospital, dying, people are ready to vote for him and his party to come back to power, right? So that's one person that I admire, and he started in the same way as well. Started as a very small party. He was kicked out of the party a bigger party that he was in. He started a small party. It took him about 5 to 10 years to build that party up. So he's someone that I look up to.
Yes. I think the idea here is that it's something that me and also kind of want to expand on in our future shows, is that small can be beautiful, and I think that right now as we speak, right, we live in this mindset that we got to keep growing, expanding, and obviously we're only thinking in terms of material wealth, right? But we're not thinking in other dimensions as well, like compassion, which we talked about before, empathy, civic consciousness, fairness. These are all the other dimensions which, I think for a lot of maybe disgruntled Singaporeans, they may feel like we are lacking in, and the question is whether there is that political will to have these dimensions institutionalized, right? Because right now everything seems very mechanistic, very cold, and I guess for a huge, we can't say majority, but at least maybe a good percent of the population, just based on the voting results, one could say maybe 40% of the country wants to go in that direction.
I think that, it's Singapore itself is very small, right? And yet it's beautiful, right? So, but I think you have to to me personally, right, this is the values that are transmitted. I'm almost in my mid-50s, right? So for the longest time, I have said that Lee Kuan Yew is the only leader that I know from the time that I was born. He was already the Prime Minister, and he passed on in 2015? I was almost in my 50s, right? And that's from the time I was born till I was almost 50, that's the only leader that I know. And so some of these values get somehow transmitted to you also, right? So it's sort of I'm always punching above my weight, I'm often conflicted between these two feelings. These two feelings of being invincible and being insignificant. I find myself struggling between these two extremes myself, right? There are days where I feel I'm invincible. I can do this, I don't care how many are against me. I can do this, But then there are other days I feel I'm so insignificant, How can I do this, So there's a constant struggle within me, right? So, and I think that that's a struggle that being small brings, right? I think being small is not an issue. It's a fact that some things are created big, some things are created small. Singapore is created small, so we have to find a way where we can adapt and adopt methods, policies, principles, things that work for us.
So this is very interesting because you talk about your personal feelings, and I had planned in mind to ask you, how do your friends, family, loved ones, what is their reactions when you decide to get more actively involved in politics? And I don't want to load it with any particular emotional spectrum one way or another, emotional direction one way or another. Just
I've got a good family. Most of them are not interested in. They are involved in politics, whether they like it or not, But my wife tells me, why are you doing this? Let's go and enjoy our. I don't have to work so hard, right? Because I'm at a different station in my life, right? That's but then it's like, oh, we're bored to death, you know.
Do you try to explain to her that it's just part of civic duty, you know, that...
Well, she knows. I mean, we have been married for so long, you know, we've known each other for so long, you know. Sometimes when you know each other for so long, you know, you can talk without talking, you know, so...
You shared with me your relationship with your children, which I find very endearing. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, my daughter, she's, I've been like very close to my children. I married at a very young age, at the age of 23. Had my daughter when I was 25, and my son when I was 27. I mean, it gave me a lot of energy, you know, to play with them, to be their friend, you know, like I said earlier, you know, tell them stories, you know, so we are a lot like friends, you know, we do a lot of things together. My son still says that I'm his best friend, right? So
that's very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I first heard that, that's amazing. Yeah.
So, I mean, my daughter was in the 2015 election. My daughter was my election agent, the youngest election agent I think in the history of Singapore.
Wow.
At the age of 21, right? She was a first-time voter. So they get all this experience because they have a weird father like me, right? So they get to rub shoulders with like some important people, you know, talk about ideas most people their age won't talk about. Right. So they seem a bit more mature than people their age, you know. So so I mean, sometimes I feel like I often have this conversation with them, right? I mean, when I went to the US, you know, we packed up 4 huge bags, one for each one of us. We left, and we came back with 4 huge bags, right? So sometimes I feel like I have shortchanged my children because we have lived in different parts of the world, you know, and they were so young, you know, disrupted them from their education and all that, you know.
I actually don't call that shortchanging.
Yeah. Well, that's what they say too.
To be honest, I think that is. Yeah.
I said, no lah, daddy. My daughter said, no lah, daddy. You know, I wouldn't exchange it for anything else in the world, you know. But you know, you cannot, as being a parent, you cannot help but think that, maybe if I had stayed, you know, they would have, because they don't have. My daughter graduated. Both my children were homeschooled, right? Under the American system, right? So they didn't go through the normal schooling system.
Actually, that's something that we can talk about because, you know, your children, they are obviously the next generation of youths, right? And you have a youth wing under RDU. So, and they've been actually on New Narrative to talk about their experiences as well. So I'm just posing it to you, right? Like, with your own interactions and contact with the youths, right? Like, do you see this, you know, like the zeitgeist changing? Do you see like different ideas, different values? And do you think that, you know, perhaps I can see for someone like yourself, you can relate to them or you can share and empathize with that, but perhaps other older Singaporeans still can't get that, like, you know, perhaps that's why they can't understand issues like LGBTQ rights or, you know, climate change, climate emergency actions and all that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I like to think of myself as an activist parent, you know. I always feel that before, my children are going to learn something anyway, either from their friends or from the TV or from the internet or whatever. Before they learn it from their friends or elsewhere, why don't I talk about it to them or with them, you know? So that's how I feel about the different issues, right? So that's how I have approached life as well, with them as well, right? And I can understand why it may be difficult for some parents who. So I think first of all, I am a strong advocate for parents to bond with their children. You know, then everything else comes naturally. And I mean, the first time that I had a conversation about sex with my daughter, I think she just reached her puberty. She must have been like 11 years old, right? So it's like, and my wife went grocery shopping, and she and I were standing outside the outside the, I think it was the Fair Price or, standing outside there. I was like, Joel, I'm just going to tell you something, you know. And the moment I started talking about sex to her, she was like, "You, Daddy, why are you telling me all this? I don't want to hear all of this," you know. But
maybe she doesn't want to hear it outside NTUC.
But my wife won't have that kind of conversation. So she has a different approach to it, right? She comes from a very traditional background and all that. She thinks that she don't want to talk about issues like that with them and all that, you know. So I mean, it's the same with my son. I know when he is a little bit older, I bought a condom and said, "Son, this is a condom. This is what you do with it," you know. So that's the kind of relationship that I have, you know, with my children, you know. And my wife feels grossed out. I say, "What am I trying to do? You know, are you like trying to teach him to have sex with somebody or whatever?" I say, "No, he needs to know. He needs to protect himself, you know." So, different parenting styles from me and my wife, right? So I can understand that many people will adopt the parenting style like my wife's. You know, let the schools do it. You know, let somebody else do it. But I think that why give up that responsibility to someone else? I want to be engaged in my children's life, you know, and I want to be able to guide them, you know, until the day maybe I'm no longer alive, you know. But I think that, I mean, this is what my friend, one of my good friend, tells me, like, you know, Joshua Chiang. So, Ravi, you've given them enough values, like anywhere in the world they go, they can survive, you know. So I think I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, I should say that, like, it's really been, I think it's been quite well founded in social science research that schools that actually administer comprehensive sex education programs, like they do much better in lowering, you know, teen pregnancy and you know, premarital sex or unsafe premarital sex, I should say. So, you know, if the schools are not doing it, then yes, you know, parents have to be like you. They have to be progressive and quite open-minded and approach it. Otherwise, you know, the schools may not be doing it themselves.
And unfortunately, I have a feeling that in Singapore, the schools don't have a comprehensive sex education program.
Yeah.
So,
in fact, there was actually, I can't remember the exact year, but one of the JCs, the students there protested against the sex ed education because it was very conservative and you know, just abstinence based. I can't remember the exact year, but there was that particular incident. Because we're just talking about policies, right? And just to make our discussion more current, so I did look through, like, you know, your website. I looked through at some of your comments. So I just want to you know, bring that up to for discussion. So since we were just on the topic of racism, let me just ask you something, right? So in your statement, right? So I'm actually going to quote you directly. You call for the government to be transparent and accountable for the failures in its race and immigration policies, acknowledge where it has done wrong, and seek the advice of minority communities on how we can heal the divide. So, I mean, it's a good statement, but I'd like you to elaborate more on it. And, you know, and of course, you know, even from the way you worded it, the government will probably respond to you and say, we've not done anything wrong. So, you know, can you expand a little bit on what you mean?
Well, I think that the government is trying as much as they could, right? But because they're in a certain mold, and this formula has worked for them for decades, has kept them in power for decades. So they have different structures and different levels of structures which keeps them in power, right? So it's very difficult for them to work without these levels of structure, right? But when you don't dismantle these levels of structure, it means that you're not really listening from the people who are the base, you know. And you know that in communication, you know, the moment it gets transferred from one to another to another to another before it reaches you, the message gets totally distorted. You get a totally different message from what the base is saying. So that's basically what we are saying. Listen directly to the people, you know. And when they I feel that when they listen directly to the people, you may be getting a totally different message altogether, right? We look at many families today. You know, there are a lot of intermarriages in a lot of families. Even in my extended family, right? I mean, I have a cousin who married a Chinese. My daughter is married to a Caucasian. You know, so. And I have another cousin who's married to a Filipina. You know, it's a very cosmopolitan, expanded family, right? I'm sure that it's the same for many other families, right, out there, right? So society is changing. So you cannot hide behind a CMIO label anymore, right? Because, you know, I mean, just taking my daughter as an example, my son-in-law is Canadian, but he comes from the Czech Republic. I mean, his ancestors come from the Czech Republic, so Slovakian or Czech, or something like that, right? Somewhere from the Caucasus region, right? So, how do you label his child? You know, Czech, Indian. So it becomes very difficult to label people that way, right? So I think it's more useful instead of breaking people up by the different races that they're in, I think it's better if we have data by their socio-economic status, right? I mean, the people who are in prison, let's take the prison example, right? You can say there's a majority of a certain, well, let's put a real, I told you that I've worked with a homeless shelter, right? Persons of a certain race are the majority in the shelter, right? And this segment of people, they're not the majority in Singapore, but in this shelter, they are the majority. So do you say that the people of this race, they are really poor, or they need help, or do you think that they are disadvantaged because there are more of them in this structure, you know, in the lower income structure? And then when you break it down by the socio-economic status, then I think you'll be able to give help without looking at their race at all, really, and see how they can move up the structures.
I think how I would rephrase what you said is that there will be certain narratives out there by certain people who will say that if a certain racial group is overrepresented in a disadvantaged group, right, it's due to their culture,
right?
And I think that's what we're trying to move past.
Right.
That there is
exactly.
Yeah. And actually, the other thing that I wanted to also comment on is that you talk about how government should listen to the people more. I actually want to go beyond that. They shouldn't just listen; they should let them participate in policy making. Because I think that is where the gap is. It's easy for the government to say, "Oh, we listen to the voices. We've done the home visits. We've surveyed the ground. We've done our polls and surveys." Sure, but in the end, it's also something that we did discuss in one of our other videos. It's very unidirectional. It's only going one way, right? It's not going two ways, and there really needs to be. If you want to call ourselves a democracy, and this is my challenge, then you got to let people participate in policy making.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even just listening to is an art. I think it's very hard when you're in a position of power to also go into a room and get honest feedback, right? You really have to think carefully about how you can understand how people really feel.
Yes, totally. Good.
Yeah.
The other thing that I have to ask you is about, and this gets a bit specific in regards to policy, right? So I think that among the opposition parties, there is a bit of a consensus that we need a bit more protectionist employment, umbrella, right? When it comes to Singapore jobs, and the PAP tends to address this by saying that if we talk about these issues, obviously the most pertinent one is CECA. Right, it will stroke anti-foreign sentiments, and they already have measures in place. They refer to the fair consideration framework. Quoting directly from Chan Chun Sing, he calls it a Goldilocks balance, right? So my opinion anyway, to pour over here, is that I think this debate has gone on for quite a while, and I just don't really feel like we seem to have made any new ground, so to speak, in terms of like the discourse, even in terms of like whether there have been concrete steps taken.
Right.
So my question to you is that, do you think that we are beating a dead horse around this, and do you think there needs to be new constructive ways to whether to just continue discussing it, or to actually formulate some kind of policy response?
Actually, just for the sake of viewers who may not be familiar with the debate, what is CECA?
Okay. So basically, it's a free trade agreement between Singapore and India, and just as a very kind of basic summary of it, the impression is that as a country, we're giving away more jobs to Indian immigrants, right, coming over to take predominantly PMET jobs, right? Because this is a predominantly PMET issue. So there are certain people out there, certain politicians as well, who feel like this is very unfairly balanced, right?
So I think CECA has now become a dog whistle against Indian foreign talent, right? So and abolish CECA, I mean, sort of like appeals to a baser instincts, right? Because a lot of people are affected by they are jobless, or their pays have been stagnating for so long, and then they go to certain parts of Singapore and all they see is certain groups of people. So it appeals to your baser instincts, right? But Singapore has always been a migrant society, right? I mean, I've been a foreigner in a strange land. I've lived as a foreigner in a strange land, and I do totally understand why people will go where they think that they can make a better future for themselves and their families, right? So I do not fault the foreign nationals or the foreign talent who come here to try and find a better future for themselves and their family, But what I do fault is a system which makes it easy for anyone to come here and live a better life than the citizens of the land. That to me is problematic. Why? Because you need to have a certain citizenship needs to have its privileges, right? If there's no privilege to citizenship, why do I even want to be a Singaporean, right? So I think, in my view, I think Singapore needs to be a globalized city with the privileges of citizens being better accentuated. So we need to have a whole round of discussion and debate around this, right? So does it mean that, so when I say that the privilege of citizenship is better accentuated, am I talking about a living wage, the whole lot of, am I talking about payment for caregiving? There's a whole lot of communication that we need to have around a topic like this, right? But I can also understand why the Abolish CECA shout, or so to speak, from certain opposition camps has drawn a lot of support. It's because it's a shortcut to toppling the PAP. I mean, for me, I don't want to take shortcuts. Yes, I think CECA is problematic, and I've said so in the past that CECA is problematic, but I think all FTA is problematic. Why? Because it's structured in a certain manner where the MNCs and the government-linked corporations and the elite, the cream of the cream, gets the best deals, and the small enterprises and the man on the road, they get scraps and bones, or maybe nothing at all. So we need to relook all free trade agreements to make sure that the small and medium enterprises, they have better benefits. The man in the street, they are prosperous, and not just CECA. So we need to look at the entire FTA thing. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I just want to quote Noam Chomsky here, because he actually talks about how free trade agreements, how they have been misconstrued as a feature for for capitalism. Like this is a perk about capitalism, but how he argues about it is that free trade agreements are really investor rights agreements. They are really vehicles for, as you mentioned, corporations, big multinational companies to move. But the idea is that it's not labor that's mobile, it's capital that's mobile. For someone to argue that free trade agreements are good, labor should be mobile as well. But it's not easy for someone like me to move to the US or to move to another country and find better seeking opportunities. And so that's why free trade agreements actually, it's not just about between two countries as you mentioned, but we need to look at the framing of it, look at the philosophy behind it, and really understand, like, is this really working out to our benefit, or is it working out to the benefit of corporations? And actually, in a way, even the anti-CECA crowd, they aren't very far off from Americans who are very disgruntled that manufacturing jobs in their country have moved on to countries within our region. Right. So there is that similar parallel that's happening here.
Yeah, again, these are structural issues of globalization, and unfortunately, the citizens of a country don't have the easy freedom to, like, if you don't think your government is giving enough perks, it's not easy for you to leave, right? And I think, unfortunately, governments take advantage of that, and they really focus their attention on trying to seduce and woo things that are more mobile, right? Like capital and businesses,
So one last one I'd like to touch on, because it pertains to media. So obviously we know about the SPH media restructuring, and again, I just want to quote you directly, right? So you have criticized the government for lack of transparency or using public monies to fund SPH media, and you want the government to take more active steps to enhance the media industry in terms of integrity, accountability, transparency. So my multi-fold question is this. One is, do you think most Singaporeans care about this? That's number one. Number two, I'm actually very curious with everything that we discussed, right? Have you actually raised these issues with your constituents and, just really see with voters whether these issues do, tie closely to their hearts, right? And of course, the third one really is, what kind of independent media landscape are you, envisioning?
You're very right in saying that this is a topic that will not interest the majority of constituents, or the majority of voters. I have visited homes, many homes, right, where they have the chow pao and the Straits Times clean and crisp on the table, not touched. This is like late in the evening, right, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, that means they subscribe to the newspapers, but they don't open it to read it, so I think, but still, media freedom is very important in my opinion, right? Because it's of course the government don't subscribe to the notion of the fourth estate, but I think it's important to have a free media, because that's how you hold the powers to be in check, and I think it's a very sad state of affairs that we have right now, right? Because the two main media outlets are controlled in one way or another by the PAP, right? So it'll be very exciting to see if the media landscape is freed up even more. I think earlier we talked about getting the people to participate in the kind of democracy that we want to have. I think the media plays a very important role in that, a key role even, I would say, right, in that. And that is the reason why there needs to be media restructuring. The media in Singapore really has to rise up with the fourth estate, to hold the powers that be in check. That's what I feel.
Yeah, I think how I feel would be a good compromise is that just recognize that we will always have some degree of state media, so Straits Times, right? And other presses, but there should be at least freedom given to individuals, groups to just set up their own parties, set up their own media. It's not going to be really radical for even a political party to have their own newsletter for a different kind of voice out there. And I think the idea here is that to a lot of Singaporeans, they have kind of devalued that loss of the laws of that right to actually broadcast your views.
Right.
Yeah, that's why we're doing this channel.
I grew up in a different era, right, where I had like lots of newspapers to choose from, right? I'm sure Ansu remembers that time as well, right? And I mean, and a time when the foreign newspaper circulation was not curtailed. It's freely available. I mean, not freely, like you have to buy it, like, but it's readily available, right? Whoever wants to subscribe to a different point of view. Of course, now the internet has made access that much more easier, but it's really a hassle, when you have to like Google for it. What's this person saying? What's that? So and the social media sort of like gets people into a huddle, right? And you sort of like, if you consume news just from your Facebook, it would mean that it's most likely that your news is skewed towards what one view, So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good. I know you usually have some closing remarks. Or
well, yeah,
questions,
sure. I guess. No, I mean we've taken up a lot of your time, Ravi. So thank you so much for being here. And I think what we had was really robust, discussion.
Yes.
And I really feel like viewers would appreciate this kind of candidness, right? And and being able to share not just personal aspects of ourselves, but even the work that you do. And
I think this is the most candid interview that I've had, and I've shared a lot of things here that I've not shared anywhere else.
Yeah, and I think the more important thing is going back to the media issue, right? It's because the way that our media is right now, they're not going to give you that much airtime to talk about yourself holistically as a person.
Right.
And so, this is why it's so, well, at least I think it's really important, really great that you're here to talk about yourself at length for at least pretty much
Thank you.
more than an hour.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And I hope that we have future good talks with you, and we also want to have more guests in the future.
Yeah, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's been really rich. We've been able to get into a lot of different
it
topics.
was all over, but
it was all over, but that's great.
No, but that's life. That's life, right?
Yeah.
yeah.
So thank you.
Sure.